Grandmother Hester Murdoch ruled over 14 grandchildren in the Piedmont Hills of Watauga County, North Carolina, beginning in the winter of 1855. Her eyes had gone milk white from a childhood fever, but her ears caught every whisper across 3 generations living under her cedar shake roof. Tell us your city and the exact time on your clock right now. How many of those children actually chose to drink what she served them? The Murdoch homestead sat 7 miles northeast of Boone, where Grandfather Creek carved a shallow bed between 2 ridges. Hester's son Caleb had built the main house in 1847 with timber. He floated down from the high country. The structure held 4 rooms and a root cellar dug 8 feet into red clay. Caleb married twice. His first wife, Martha, bore him 5 children before dying in childbirth with twins who never drew breath. His second wife, Rebecca, brought 3 more children before a wagon accident crushed her spine against a locust fence. Both women learned to fear the old woman's evening rituals before they died. The children ranged in age from 4 to 16 when the ceremonies began. Hester kept a ledger bound in cracked leather that recorded each child's name, birth weight, and what she called their blood clarity. She wrote with a turkey quill dipped in blackberry ink, forming letters that leaned backward like they were trying to escape the page. Winter brought the worst of it. When snow covered the mountain laurel and ice skinned the water buckets, Hester would call the children to gather around the largest hearth. She kept 3 cast iron pots hanging from hooks driven into the chimney stones. The smallest pot held rendered pig fat that she heated until it bubbled and spat. The children understood they had no choice in these gatherings. Caleb would leave the house entirely, walking down to the creek bed to split kindling until his mother finished her work. Rebecca, when she was still alive and mobile, would retreat to the farthest room and stuff rags under the door to block the sounds. Hester mixed the boiling lard with what she called ancestor dust. She kept this gray powder in a wooden box, carved with her father's initials. The children never learned exactly what the dust contained, but they noticed she added fresh material to the box after family members died. She would grind something with a stone pestle behind the house, working by moonlight when no one could watch. The ceremony required each child to drink 1 full ladle of the mixture. Hester would pour the steaming liquid into pewter cups that had belonged to her grandmother. The metal conducted heat so efficiently that several children burned their fingers trying to hold the handles. Those who hesitated received 3 sharp raps across the knuckles with her walking stick. Blood runs thin in weak families, she would say while ladling the mixture. Ours needs thickening every winter, or the line dies out. Young Ephraim Murdoch was the first to show what the mixture actually did to growing bodies. He was 9 years old during the winter of 1856, when his stomach began swelling after the 3rd ceremony. His appetite disappeared entirely, but his belly continued growing until his ribs showed through stretched skin. He died on a February morning, when ice covered the windows thick enough to block the sunrise. Hester wrapped Ephraim's body in a quilt and placed it in the root cellar until the ground thawed enough for burial. She added something from his corpse to her wooden box before Caleb dug the grave behind the house. The family plot eventually held 8 small mounds that spring wildflowers avoided completely. The surviving children learned to recognize the warning signs in each other. Dorcas Murdoch, age 12, noticed her youngest sister Patience developing the same distended stomach that had killed Ephraim. She tried feeding Patience charcoal and warm milk to absorb whatever poison coursed through their systems. It never worked. The children who showed symptoms always died within 6 weeks of their last ceremony. Their bodies would swell, then shrink, then fail entirely as their organs gave up processing the foreign substances Hester forced them to consume. 2 children escaped before the ceremonies could kill them. Luther Murdoch, the oldest at 16, left home in March 1857 after watching his sister Charity waste away to 43 pounds before dying. He walked barefoot through snow to reach his uncle's farm in Wilkes County, arriving with frostbitten toes and stories that his relatives initially refused to believe. Luther's cousin Jacob rode back to the Murdoch homestead to investigate. He arrived during the day when Hester was grinding fresh material behind the house. The wooden box sat open on a tree stump, revealing fragments of bone, teeth, and hair, mixed with something that looked like crushed eggshells. Jacob confronted Caleb about what he had seen. Caleb admitted he knew about the ceremonies, but claimed he had no power to stop them. His mother controlled the property deed and threatened to burn the house down if anyone interfered. With her bloodline purification, she had already proven her willingness to use violence when she broke Rebecca's arm with a fire poker for hiding one of the children during a ceremony. The winter of 1858 brought the heaviest snows anyone could. Remember, drifts reached the windows of the main house and blocked the path to the root cellar completely. Hester announced this would be the most important ceremony yet because the family needed extra protection during harsh weather. She heated the lard, a pot, until the fat caught fire and had to be smothered with a wet cloth. The children gathered as usual, but this time she had prepared enough mixture to require 3 full ladles per child instead of 1. The oldest remaining child, Simeon, was 14 and had survived 4 previous ceremonies, only because he had learned to vomit immediately after swallowing. Simeon tried to warn the younger children, but Hester caught him whispering instructions during the ceremony. She forced him to drink 6 ladles while she held his arms behind his back. The scalding mixture burned his throat so badly that he could not swallow solid food for the rest of his short life. Within 2 weeks, 5 more children showed the telltale stomach swelling. They died in order of age, youngest first, while Hester continued adding to her wooden box and preparing for spring ceremonies. She claimed the high death rate proved the bloodline was fighting back against purification, which meant she needed to increase the potency of future mixtures. Only 2 children reached their 13th birthday, Dorcas and her brother Ezekiel. They survived because they had learned to induce vomiting silently and to hide the evidence of their sickness from their grandmother. Dorcas discovered that eating raw turnips before each ceremony helped line her stomach against the burning mixture. The community around Boone began noticing the pattern of deaths at the Murdoch homestead by 1859. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, who served the Mountain families in that area, was called to examine 3 of the children's bodies. He found evidence of severe internal burning and what he described as foreign materials that no human digestive system should encounter. Dr. Hartwell rode to the county seat to report his findings, but the sheriff was reluctant to investigate an isolated family's private business. Mountain communities handled their own problems in those days, and outsiders were expected to respect family autonomy even when they suspected wrongdoing. The intervention came from an unexpected source. Martha's sister, Elizabeth, had married a preacher named Reverend Isaiah Blackwood, who traveled circuit among the mountain churches. He arrived at the Murdoch homestead in April 1859 to conduct a delayed funeral service for the children who had died that winter. Reverend Blackwood immediately recognized signs of intentional poisoning when he saw the remaining children. Dorcas weighed 67 pounds, despite being nearly 13 years old. Ezekiel had lost most of his hair and showed burn scars around his mouth from the scalding ceremonies. Both children begged the preacher to take them away from their grandmother. The confrontation happened during Sunday dinner when most of the extended family had gathered to hear Reverend Blackwood preach. Hester brought out her wooden box and began preparing for what she called a spring cleansing ceremony, to be performed in front of the preacher as proof of her family's devotion. The box contained more than anyone had ever seen before. Fragments of bone and teeth were mixed with dried organs, hair braids, and fingernail clippings from every child who had died under her care. She had ground everything into a fine powder that gave off a sweet, rotting smell when exposed to air. Reverend Blackwood demanded to examine the box's contents. He recognized human remains immediately and understood what had been happening to the Murdoch children. When Hester refused to surrender the box, he grabbed it from her hands and threw the entire contents into the fire. The powder burned with a blue flame that filled the room with smoke thick enough to send everyone outside. Coughing, Hester screamed that the Reverend had destroyed 4 years of careful preparation, and that the bloodline would now weaken beyond repair. She lunged at him with her walking stick, but Caleb finally found courage to restrain his mother. 3 families witnessed what happened next. Hester confessed to forcing the children to consume boiling lard mixed with pulverized remains of their dead siblings. She claimed this practice would strengthen their blood against disease and ensure they would live longer than ordinary children. She seemed genuinely confused when Reverend Blackwood explained that she had been systematically murdering her own grandchildren. Caleb admitted he had watched 12 children die from these ceremonies without taking action to stop them. He said his mother controlled him through threats and superstition, but several witnesses remembered seeing him hold children down while they struggled against drinking the mixture. His level of responsibility became a source of lasting division in the community. The sheriff finally agreed to investigate after Reverend Blackwood presented testimony from 8 witnesses. They found the family burial ground contained 14 small graves, but only 2 of those children had died from recognizable diseases. The others showed evidence of internal burning and organ failure consistent with repeated poisoning. Hester Murdoch was arrested in May 1859 and transported to the county jail in Boone. She spent her time in custody demanding that someone continue the ceremonies for Dorcas and Ezekiel, insisting they would die without regular bloodline purification. She never acknowledged that her actions had killed the other children. The trial began in September 1859 with testimony from surviving family members and Dr. Hartwell's medical examination. The prosecution struggled to explain Hester's motives, because she genuinely believed she was protecting her grandchildren rather than harming them. Her defense lawyer argued that traditional mountain healing practices should not be judged by outside medical standards. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before finding Hester guilty of multiple counts of murder. The judge sentenced her to death by hanging, but she died in her cell 2 weeks later from what the jail physician called natural causes. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave outside the town cemetery. Caleb Murdoch sold the family property and moved to Tennessee with the 2 surviving children. Dorcas and Ezekiel both lived to adulthood despite the damage done to their digestive systems. They never had children of their own, which ended the Murdoch bloodline exactly as Hester had feared it would. The homestead was demolished in 1862, when the new owner discovered the root cellar had been used as a makeshift crematorium. Charred bone fragments and melted metal objects suggested Hester had been destroying evidence of her activities for years before anyone investigated. The cast iron pot with 17 finger scratches was buried under 6 feet of stones. Locally, families still avoided that section of Grandfather Creek into the 1890s because nothing would grow in the soil around the former Murdoch property. The county surveyor noted unusual mineral deposits in his 1883 report, but testing revealed only trace amounts of ash and iron consistent with repeated burning of organic materials. Dr. Hartwell's private journal, discovered in his estate papers, decades later contained detailed sketches of what he found inside the Murdoch children. Their stomachs showed burns in perfect circular patterns, as if the boiling lard had pooled in specific areas before eating through tissue. He documented 17 distinct types of foreign material recovered from their digestive tracts, including bone fragments filed to powder and what appeared to be dried blood flakes. The physician noted that several children showed signs of attempting to neutralize the poison themselves. Young patients Murdoch had consumed large quantities of clay before her death, evidenced by red sediment packed throughout her intestinal tract. Her brother Thomas had eaten raw eggs, likely stolen from the henhouse in a desperate attempt to coat his stomach lining against the burning mixture. These details never appeared in Dr. Hartwell's official reports because he feared the community would reject medical intervention entirely if they learned how extensively he had examined the ewe. Children's corpses, mountain families guarded their dead jealously in a considered autopsy a violation of Christian burial practices. Luther Murdoch, the 16-year-old who escaped to his uncle's farm, provided the most detailed testimony about his grandmother's rituals. He described how Hester would begin preparing for each ceremony 3 days in advance, heating the cast iron pot slowly to prevent cracking. She insisted the lard reach a specific temperature that made it bubble in exactly 7 distinct locations around the rim. Hester's preparation ritual included grinding the ancestor dust with precise movements. She would make 49 clockwise circles with the stone pestle, then 49 counterclockwise, while reciting names of dead family members stretching back 4 generations. Luther memorized this process because he hoped understanding her methods might help him protect his younger siblings. The wooden box that contained the ancestor dust was carved from chestnut wood by Hester's father, Jeremiah Thorne, who had learned woodworking from German settlers in the Yadkin Valley. The box measured exactly 7 inches long, 3 inches wide, and 4 inches deep. Jeremiah had carved his initials JT into the lid along with a pattern of interlocking circles that Hester claimed represented the eternal nature of family blood. Inside the box, Luther counted remnants from at least 23 different bodies. Hester had been collecting material from deceased family members since before her marriage to Murdoch's father. She kept hair samples, fingernail clippings, and small bones from relatives who died naturally, but she also harvested organs and tissue from the children who died during her ceremonies. The most disturbing discovery came from Luther's testimony about Hester's bookkeeping methods. She maintained detailed records of each child's progress through the purification process in a leather-bound ledger that she kept hidden beneath loose floorboards in her bedroom. Each page contained a child's name, birth date, ceremony dates, and descriptions of their physical changes following each ritual consumption. Luther had secretly read portions of this ledger during the winter of 1856. Hester recorded not only the children's declining health, but also her observations about which combinations of ancestor dust produced the most dramatic effects. She noted that mixing bone powder from deceased infants created more severe stomach burning, while hair from elderly relatives caused gradual wasting that took longer to kill. These records proved Hester understood exactly what her ceremonies were doing to the children. She wrote detailed comparisons between different mixtures and their effects, treating her grandchildren as test subjects in an ongoing experiment. One entry described young Ephraim's death as successful completion of blood clarification, and noted that his rapid decline proved the mixture was working properly. The ledger contained sketches of the children at various stages of poisoning. Hester drew careful diagrams showing how their bodies changed after each ceremony, marking areas of swelling, discoloration, and visible pain. She seemed particularly interested in documenting the progression of stomach distension and the patterns of burn marks around their mouths. Luther's uncle, Samuel Murdoch, preserved several pages from this ledger after the trial. He kept them as evidence of his sister-in-law's calculated cruelty, though he never showed them to other family members. These pages revealed that Hester had been planning to expand her ceremonies to include children from neighboring families, believing her success with bloodline purification could benefit the entire mountain community. The trial proceedings uncovered additional evidence of Hester's systematic approach to poisoning. Neighbors testified that she had visited other families to inquire about their children's health problems, offering to include them in special healing ceremonies. Mrs. Adelaide Crawford reported that Hester had specifically asked about her daughter's chronic cough and suggested the girl might benefit from internal cleansing. Fortunately for the Crawford family, Adelaide's husband refused to allow their daughter to participate in any Murdoch family rituals. He had grown suspicious after noticing the unusually high death rate among Hester's grandchildren and had warned other families to avoid accepting her offers of help with sick children. The prosecution established that Hester had attempted to recruit at least 6 additional children from 4 different families for her ceremonies. She promised parents that the rituals would cure everything from respiratory problems to behavioral issues, claiming her methods had been passed down through generations of successful healers. Investigation of the Murdoch property revealed extensive evidence of Hester's activities beyond the ceremonies themselves. The root cellar contained a primitive crematorium, where she had been burning the internal organs of children who died during her care. Charcoal deposits showed she had been conducting these fires regularly for several years, always during new moon phases when darkness would hide the smoke. Behind the main house, investigators found a grinding station where Hester prepared her ancestor dust. The stone pestle and mortar showed microscopic traces of bone, teeth, hair, and dried tissue. More disturbing were the metal tools she used to harvest material from fresh corpses, including small knives designed specifically for removing organs from children's bodies. The grinding area also contained glass vials filled with different types of prepared powders. Each vial was labeled with symbols rather than words, suggesting Hester had developed a coding system for different types of ancestor dust. Analysis of these powders revealed human bone calcium mixed with organic compounds that would have been highly toxic when consumed at the temperatures she used. Testimony from Caleb Murdoch revealed the full extent of his complicity in his mother's activities. He admitted to helping restrain children who struggled against drinking the boiling mixture, claiming he believed resistance would make the ceremonies less effective. He also confessed to helping move bodies to the root cellar and assisting with the cremation of organs after each child's death. Caleb's testimony included disturbing details about his mother's behavior during the ceremonies. Hester would enter a trance-like state while preparing the mixture, speaking in voices that claimed to be dead relatives approving of her actions. She insisted that the spirits of deceased family members were guiding her hands as she ladled the scalding lard into each child's cup. The children themselves had developed elaborate strategies for surviving the ceremonies. Dorcas Murdoch revealed that she and several siblings had discovered ways to minimize absorption of the poisonous mixture. They learned to coat their mouths with butter stolen from the pantry, creating a protective barrier against the worst burns. Some children attempted to dilute the mixture by secretly adding water to their cups, but Hester quickly detected this strategy and began marking the liquid level on each cup before distribution. Others tried to spill portions of their allotment, but she forced them to lick the spilled material from the floor while it was still scalding hot. The most successful survival strategy involved controlled vomiting immediately after consuming the required amount. Dorcas and Ezekiel learned to trigger their gag reflexes by pressing their tongues against the backs of their throats while swallowing. They would then sneak outside to vomit behind the house, covering the evidence with snow during winter months. These survival techniques required careful coordination among the children because Hester monitored them closely after each ceremony. She would check their breath for evidence of vomiting and examine their faces for signs that they had not fully consumed their portions. Children caught attempting to avoid the full effects of the mixture received double portions at the next ceremony. The prosecution's case was strengthened by physical evidence from the children's clothing. Several garments showed distinctive burn patterns where the boiling mixture had splashed during forced consumption. The cotton and wool fabrics had been scorched in precise shapes that matched the rim dimensions of Hester's ladles, proving the extreme temperatures involved in her ceremonies. Medical testimony established that the temperatures required to create these burn patterns would have caused immediate and severe damage to human tissue. Dr. Hartwell demonstrated for the jury how contact with lard heated to those temperatures would destroy the lining of a child's mouth, throat, and stomach within seconds of contact. The defense attempted to portray Hester as a victim of mountain superstitions, rather than a calculated killer. Her lawyer argued that she genuinely believed traditional healing practices were more effective than modern medicine, pointing to the isolated nature of her community and the prevalence of folk remedies among mountain families. This strategy failed when the prosecution presented evidence of Hester's systematic record-keeping and experimentation. The detailed nature of her observations proved she understood cause and effect relationships between her ceremonies and the children's deaths. Her notations showed clear awareness that certain combinations of ingredients produced faster or more painful deaths. Community reaction to the trial revelations was divided along family lines and geographic boundaries. Relatives who had lived closer to the Murdoch homestead claimed they had suspected problems but felt powerless to intervene in another family's private affairs. More distant neighbors expressed shock at learning the extent of the systematic poisoning that had occurred over 4 years. Several families admitted they had noticed the unusual number of deaths among Murdoch children, but had attributed them to natural causes or inherited weaknesses. The isolated nature of mountain communities meant that news traveled slowly and families were reluctant to interfere with each other's parenting decisions, even when they harbored suspicions. The trial also revealed the economic pressures that had prevented earlier intervention. Caleb Murdoch owed money to several local families, and his mother's property represented the only collateral securing those debts. Creditors were reluctant to take actions that might result in Hester's imprisonment or death, fearing they would lose their investments if the family property was abandoned. During her incarceration, Hester continued to insist that her ceremonies had been necessary for family survival. She claimed that children who died during the purification process were actually the lucky ones because they had achieved perfect blood clarity before succumbing to worldly weaknesses. Those who survived, she argued, would live longer and healthier lives because of their participation in the rituals. Jail records show that Hester refused to eat any food that had not been prepared according to her specific requirements. She demanded that her meals be heated to scalding temperatures and mixed with ash from burned wood, claiming that anything else would contaminate her own bloodline. Guards eventually had to force-feed her to prevent starvation. Her death in custody occurred under circumstances that raised questions about suicide versus natural causes. The jail physician found no obvious signs of violence, but Hester's body showed evidence of severe dehydration and internal bleeding consistent with consuming caustic substances. Some witnesses suspected she had somehow obtained materials to perform a final purification ceremony on herself. The aftermath of Hester's death brought additional revelations about the scope of her activities. Relatives cleaning out her belongings discovered correspondence with individuals in 3 other mountain counties who had inquired about her bloodline purification methods. These letters suggested she had been developing plans to establish a network of practitioners throughout the Appalachian region. One particularly disturbing letter came from a woman in Tennessee who described losing 4 children to mysterious illnesses and asked for detailed instructions on proper ceremony procedures. Hester's draft reply included specific recipes for preparing ancestor dust and advice on maintaining optimal temperatures for the lard mixture. This correspondence was never mailed due to her arrest. Investigation of similar suspicious child. Deaths in neighboring counties revealed at least 3 other families where adults had forced children to consume heated animal fats mixed with unidentified powders. However, none of these cases involved the systematic approach or detailed record-keeping that characterized Hester's activities. The surviving Murdoch children required extensive medical treatment to address the damage caused by repeated poisoning. Dorcas suffered from chronic stomach problems throughout her life and was never able to digest fatty foods properly. Ezekiel developed severe dental problems from the acid burns to his mouth and lost most of his teeth before reaching adulthood. Both. Survivors reported persistent nightmares about the ceremony sounds and smells. They described being unable to tolerate the scent of cooking pork or the sight of cast-iron cookware without experiencing panic attacks. These psychological effects lasted decades and influenced their decisions to remain childless rather than risk perpetuating family patterns of abuse. The Murdoch family property changed hands several times after Caleb's departure, but no subsequent owners remained for more than 2 years. Residents reported persistent problems with water sources, crop failures, and an unusually high rate of livestock deaths. Local families began attributing these difficulties to spiritual contamination from Hester's activities. By 1865, the land had been abandoned entirely. The main house gradually deteriorated from weather and neglect, but the root cellar remained structurally intact. Occasional visitors reported finding fragments of bone and metal objects in the cellar, suggesting Hester's crematorium had not been completely cleared during the original investigation. The cast iron pot with 17 finger scratches was recovered during demolition of the house in 1862. Workers initially planned to salvage the cookware, but several men refused to handle the pot after noticing the distinctive claw marks around its rim. The pot was eventually buried with other debris from the demolished structure. Recent archaeological surveys of the former Murdoch property have identified the approximate burial location of this pot and other artifacts from Hester's ceremonies. Ground-penetrating radar shows a concentrated area of metallic objects beneath 6 feet of accumulated soil and stone. However, local authorities have declined requests to excavate the site due to community opposition and concerns about disturbing what many residents consider a cursed location. If Hester truly believed she was saving her grandchildren, why did she continue the ceremonies after watching so many of them die? If the community suspected what was happening, why did they wait 4 years to intervene? The iron pot remains buried somewhere along Grandfather Creek, still holding the scratches, left by small fingers that never stopped fighting for air.